very happy that our next speaker, very dynamic and exciting speaker, Professor Sonia Gipson Rankin from UNM Law. She's worked with me for a number of years thinking about issues of bias and discrimination, but she's got a background both in computer science and law, and that intersection is really important. I hope everybody's sort of thinking about what are their intersections going to be. And so I will just turn this over to Professor Gipson Rankin to tell us about how to think about deepfakes.
All right, thank you. I'm setting my timer. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Listen, don't let that baklava slow you down. It was delicious. It was a wonderful meal. The lights are off. It's a cozy fall afternoon. So let's have some fun with deepfakes, something fake to get us through. So I'm here from UNM Law right across Lomas. Had a great time at lunch chatting with some colleagues north of Lomas and kind of thinking about the intentionality of interdisciplinary work that we can all do together. And this was a quote that was said at a Otakon conference that really stood out to me when thinking about this idea of synthetic images and deepfakes and this entire topic. We are fast approaching a tipping point where non-human generated content will vastly outnumber the amount of human generated content. Gut reactions when you hear that? Who's like, ooh? Who's like, ooh? A little bit of both, right? It depends on what image you're after and what kind of things you're thinking about. And so I thought this was interesting. Earlier this year, you may have seen this in the news, of the Hong Kong-based employee who ended up on a conference where he could physically see his employer and a committee of people from his place of employment telling him to begin to transfer what was the equivalent of $25 million into a series of accounts. It was about 17 different transactions he had to do. And his response is, but they told me to do it. I looked right at my boss who told me to do it. It was all fake and it was all a scam. You may have heard about some of the voice cloning issues that we've watched happening across the world. United Arab Emirates, where criminals clone the voice of a company director to orchestrate a $35 million heist. Kind of probably the boringest movie you've ever seen. They just clicked a bunch of buttons and hit go, and then they got $35 million. In Mumbai, a businessman fell victim to a voice cloning scam that involved a fake call from the Indian embassy in Dubai. In Australia, scammers cloned the Queensland Premier Stephen Miles to attempt to trick people to invest in Bitcoin. And in the United States, how many of you have heard any of this happening locally where teenagers' voices are, a parent picks up a phone, it's their teenager's voice screaming, "Mom, Dad, help me," and it turns out that it has been cloned voices in order to extract money and gift cards. This happened to a friend of mine who's got a mechanical engineering degree. And she got caught, and it took her a moment until she realized that was not actually my daughter. These are real concerns that we're watching across the world, and it's got us thinking about some of these kind of big topics. So I want to just tell you a little bit about how deepfake works, some potential threats and legal implications, some ways that we're looking to address deepfake challenges both in the tech and in the law, and then a call to action to each of us in this room to be a bit aware of this topic. So how do deepfake work? Deepfakes work. I'm going to give a terrible, terrible explanation. So if I make a lot of eye contact with Melanie, it's because she's going to tell me all the things that it should really be described as. But this is actually how I got my job at UNM Law. I decided in 2018, I'm going to explain generative adversarial networks to the legal community. And I showed them this picture, and they're like, what are you talking about? I was cutting edge. Just so y'all know, 2018 was big time stuff. But this always impresses me on the work that my colleagues and so many are doing over here in the computer science space. This is groundbreaking. This idea that we've got this detective, and the detective is going to be taught this is what real data looks like. That's the Mona Lisa. And then we've got the generator, the forger, who can't even see what's going on. It's just slapping ink all over the screen. And we've got this, and it's working off of just sheer nonsense, just completely indecipherable information. And the detective, our Sherlock Holmes colleague there, is constantly going to be looking at every new iteration that the forger puts forward to declare if it's a truth or if it's fake. It's really, really exciting. And every time the generator creates something, they'll say, nope, that's not it, and that's not it, until the forger gets so good at all these little tiny incremental changes that the detective cannot tell the difference between the real data and the forged data. And that is what gets in front of us, right? This is pretty fascinating. Who thinks that's kind of cool? I should hope a lot more hands. That is super cool. Y'all act like we've been doing this forever. This is kind of brand new stuff in the last 5 years. And so when it comes to the space of deepfakes, right, it's working with encoders and decoders, and it's got to study, right? What does the original face look like? Encode it to understand what makes a face. Now, we talk about this a lot. All the people who had to study bad deepfakes. If you want to really freak yourself out, take your kid's picture and ask the AI to turn it into a human. And these humans that are generated, you know, while your kid draws a great big head and half a leg, and the AI's like, that's who it is, that's mom. It's really disturbing, right? But the AI's trying to figure this thing out. How many eyes do humans have? Where does hair go? What do eyelashes look like? And it's got to reconstruct that actual face. Well, from there, it's got to compare it to a different face, right? And it's got to go through that same process of the original faces to reconstructed face A and face B. And then we have the fun. Now we get to what the deepfake is actually thinking about, which is, now take those latent facial features from A and from B and swap them and decode it differently so that we can start to see something slightly different reconstructed on face A to face B. This is pretty cool. And what we end up doing is being able to now put in words and context so that you and I can understand it and manipulate it and say, all right, I got a man with glasses, but subtract man, add woman, and now I've got woman with glasses. And the A is like, here we go. Let's see what some images can look like. And you know, glasses are all, you know, suspect. This is a little bit older. The tech's gotten much, much better. But in the early iterations, this was fascinating. That allows us to invent or create things that are in our mind and our ideas. And we can see this being used in lots of different contexts, right? It can be used in, this idea can be used in the images we saw, but also to create text, to create audio, to create video, and to generate something different. That was a beautiful clip that Matthew shared with us. I was really moved about that Virginia Congresswoman who could hear her voice. And if you've never had a change in circumstances, whether it's your ability to walk and losing that, your ability to smile and losing that, your ability to speak and losing that, you won't appreciate how powerful it is for her to have something she was always used to, which was conversation. But it gets really interesting because who knows where you could go. Here's some of me and my many non-adventures. I work with a colleague of mine at William & Mary Law School who I gave him a safe sandbox of 100 images of me living my life. And I said, I want you to create me doing wild adventures. He's like, well, what about Sonia at the club? What about Sonia gardening? What about Sonia at the grocery store? That's kind of realistic. What about Sonia rock wall climbing? The pictures of this one, it didn't know what to do. There are no pictures of me doing any physical activity. The AI's like, she doesn't do that. I don't know how we're going to get her out there. What about Sonia at a coffee shop? And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then I said, well, let's have some real fun. Show me Sonia in the classroom. Yeah, she stands around talking all the time. This was me and my Simone Biles movement after the summer. Why not? Why not? But I felt much better once he put me on the Enterprise. This felt right. This felt good, and the hairstyles weren't too bad, right? We can do some fun things. We can do some really exciting things. But I get concerned when these fun things we can do can be used to make decisions on your liberty, your access to your children, or your constitutional rights. And so that brings us to some areas that we're looking at, right? Some potential threats and implications that can occur. In particular, I'll chat a little bit about misinformation and defamation, privacy and consent, and then challenges to evidence authenticity. I just gave a version of this talk to the National Association of Women Judges. There's about 250 women judges from across the United States and internationally who are in the courtroom talking about what happens when the evidence that's put in front of them is unverifiable and what is at their disposal or their opportunities. So the first one that stands out will be misinformation and disinformation, right? What happens when the voice you hear is not true? What happens when the words that are in front of you are something you cannot comprehend? And when we look at defamation is this idea of someone saying something about another person that is false, and it can either be libel, meaning it's written, or it can be slander, it is spoken. And there are rules and parameters that we look at. And this idea of deep fakes, taking my face, my voice, my image, doing or saying something, you know, am I ready to fight someone making a picture of me rock wall climbing? Not this week, but maybe. if it goes against something that I'm arguing for, right? Or something that I need to think through. So this is an area that we're watching, which is rising cases. And right now, the law is using our historical notions of defamation to be standards for this. Now, the defense of defamation is the truth. If you can show that whatever is out there is the truth, then that's okay. So, Sonia at the grocery store often occurs. Sonia at that fake grocery store, not quite, right? And so we're going to watch some of these cases rise. The next area that we have been watching has been election interference concerns. You may have followed the case earlier this year where the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, did find a gentleman liable, or they found him guilty for election interference. He had created deepfake robocalls of President Joe Biden saying things that he had not said. He was fined $6 million and given 30 days to repay before they started coming after his stuff. So this is a very real thing that we're watching, and we have not really pulled out too much from the 2024 federal national election, but we're going to be watching to see what happened as related to anything that might have come through on social media accounts that are going to try to use Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act as a barrier to say, hey, we've got a sword and shield protection for using that. But this is the next one that I think is a really, really of grave concern that we're watching, which is privacy and consent, and what happens when people's faces are put. Now, I'll tell you the truth, in 2000, I had a brand new baby. I took her to Florida to go meet my grandmother, and we used dial-up. We used dial-up on my grandma. That means we unplugged my grandma's landline, for some of y'all that don't know, plugged it into my computer, I logged into AOL, and then I turned on the web camera so my mother could see a picture of me and my grandmother. My grandmother said, Sonia, get my picture off of there. I don't want somebody to take my face and put it on another body. And I said, oh, Grandma, that'll never happen. Don't you worry. My grandmother was dead right. She was dead right about a lot of things. Because it's become even more extreme than that. They don't even need to take her face from there and put it on someone else's body. It can be created in much more complex ways. What we're watching in the courts right now is the distinction between non-consensual intimate images and non-consensual synthetic intimate images. And the courts are trying to make a distinction. So, for example, non-consensual intimate images would be if you took private pictures that you shared with a partner, you break up, and they use those pictures in some way to embarrass you online or to mess with your job. You did agree to take those pictures, you didn't agree for them to be used in that way. Well, now we're watching this next thing that's occurring in our middle schools and our high schools, which is predominantly young girls are finding that their school yearbook picture is being taken and they're being put in compromising positions that they did not agree to. This is a huge issue, and right now they're trying to track down, this was in October 15th, they're still trying to get these bots, and right now the city of San Francisco has filed suit against a number of tech companies who have servers that are in charge of all of these things. In the court, we're watching something else a little bit more distinct, which is, do we have enough laws to address this? Do we have some situations we can use? And right now, the Federal Rules of Evidence 901, which says anything you put forward has got to be true. You got to back it up. And so that's something that the courts have been turning to. We're hoping to see if they can do something related to pre-trial evidentiary hearings. As you can imagine, if you put this right in front of a jury in the middle of trial, and of course, opposing counsel is going to yell objection, and the court finds it to be, it's not going to help, so they're going to pull it out. But by now, the jury's already got it in their head, and we're trying to figure out what to do about that. And we're going to see a rise of experts. Colleagues, this is your new backup side gig, because we're going to need you to be able to go into the courtroom and explain how the tech works, how it was developed, where the servers are, and how it could or could not have been manipulated. This is something I created for my students, or for the legal community, to kind of see that there are some pros. Listen. Was there a volume? Oh man, well, it's me talking English and Spanish and Mandarin and German. It's pretty cool. because I barely got English down. Something else we're looking at are technological solutions and legal and ethical responses. McAfee's got a new product out that we're hoping can do some AI image detection. Heads up, none of them work. It's all trash. So once again, that's another side hustle for you, is to create some really, really good deepfake searches that we can find. And here's the other one that we really need in the legal community. I need you all to figure out how to do some watermarking. There's too much evidence that comes into a courtroom. They cannot keep track of everything. And this is going to be really, really hard, because as soon as you come up with a way to watermark it, nefarious actors are going to make sure there's a way to unwatermark it. So I want you to be thinking about this in terms of something that we're looking at, but this is something the legal community is hoping the tech community will create to help in the process of justice. There's another deep fake of me, and it was not me, but it was me at the same time. So it was very disturbing to watch me and Vice President Kamala Harris give a speech. And it was really concerning, because I was like, see, I did my hair, that's why I do my hair that way. I was like, look at this, my eyebrows have never moved that area, I've never pulled that direction, but it was so easily done, and it does not take a lot of money nor time. We've got legislation happening all over the country. About 17 states are doing something intentional about online impersonation. I'm so very grateful that Alina Lauer is here, who's been at the helm of New Mexico being at the forefront of much of this work. Y'all give it up for her. This is a huge deal to make sure that our elections were fair and that there was not nefarious behavior with deepfake images. But the FTC is really trying to figure out some work that can be done to address this. Call to action. Show up at things like this and be involved. Be very connected to it. Here are my thoughts. Don't worry. Absolutely don't worry. We know the AI is not smart. It's not smart. It's not smart. It's not getting any smarter. It seems to talk to itself more and devolve in the middle of the conversation. But the collaborations are occurring between the tech community, the legal community. Every conference I go to, there's an intentional effort and desire for more experts to come and explain this in legal spaces. You should totally worry. You should be totally upset. The tech is changing rapidly. We can't keep up. The courts can't keep up. And I'm very much concerned about this with juries and with triers of fact. Who do you believe, me or your lying eyes? And at some stage, the images that we see and the voices we hear are going to be so fake that we won't know what real is anymore. I'll turn over, and I at least want to let you know, I, for one, welcome our AI overlords. I make sure to say that out loud so that they know I'm one of the good ones. Sorry about y'all. But I thank you for your time, and I will turn it back over to Melanie. I'm happy to chat with you on our breaks.
We should still see, do we have questions in the audience? We've got a little, we got a little time for a couple questions. Okay. So go ahead, let's take one back in.
My AI, I do like my AI lady, so I always like to show her. She always makes me smile. Yes?
I'd like to ask a question about something that's sort of adjacent to what you spoke about, and that's about creators' rights and their work being ingested involuntarily into the AI learning pipeline, and then, being absolutely, destroyed. You're talking about, the designers, sound engineers, producers, musicians, composers, the whole lot. And I mean, just one example earlier this year, I saw on Twitter there was someone, saying, oh, there's this great new AI app. You can compose music in any genre from any time period, whatever you want. Just put in the prompt and it'll come back with something. And as someone who's been sort of a musician and invested in Irish music, one of the 10 examples this person gave was an Irish music thing. I was like, oh, here is Irish fiddle music, and it was an exact copy of a very specific artist with exact same production techniques. So you're robbing the artist, you're robbing the producer, you're robbing the sound engineer, you're robbing the whole ecosystem, and say, oh yeah, you can have this for $1, whatever your compute processing power is. And I was wondering, is there anything in the legal realm that is going to address that?
There's lots of artists fighting about that and really being involved. I know Dr. Moses worked closely with George R.R. Martin, our own local genius author, who is one of the people at the helm of some of these issues of their work. Now, we run into two different complexities. One, which is that the one who created that final piece is not able or cannot be liable because they didn't create it. Right now, the law under copyright has found that if it's not wholly human created, it doesn't belong to anyone. So this terrible thing happened and no one's at fault, right? That's where we are right now in copyright law. There's nothing to kind of hook on to say, even the person who put in the prompt, even the software company that engineered it. So we're running into two things. One, which is process. Where did they get the data, and was there some kind of theft of the data? But you know, if I bought a copy of the music and I uploaded it to my cloud, and my cloud has now been, so those are the kind of things we're looking at. This is why I get very excited to look at the steps of the encoder and the decoder and where each thing happens, because under the law, I need to be able to point to where there might have been a liability issue. We are also seeing this with, so a lot of authors are fighting about it. Right now, the New York Times has been fighting. I think they did not win. I think something they asked for got shut down. I don't think we're going to see a lot of protections for artists in the next administration. Honestly, I think we're going to see a lot of innovation, because the quest will be for innovation, which means it's going to have to happen at the state level. Sorry, Alina. Sorry.
Are you taking abreast of the emergence of this whole notion of smart contracts with blockchain technologies? You have, you know, clear chain of custody of, you know, who signed off on what, you know, what thing was done by what, having sort of automated, clear rules of engagement. And is that going to transform our legal profession over time?
That's funny. I'm speaking at the Real Property Law Institute on Friday at the State Bar, and they've got lots of conversations about smart contracts and blockchain that they're looking at. I'm jumping in and giving them AI and getting out, because I didn't like property class, I don't like rules against perpetuities, so I'm gonna give them what I know and get out. But what I do know is that I am personally concerned about cybersecurity risks and ways that can be infiltrated along the way. The practice is less worried about it. So I can remember this is my 20th anniversary being a lawyer. I can remember the change of driving to the courthouse to file documents until we moved to e-filing. And I remember a lot of the conversations that would happen in the community, which was, am I violating attorney-client privilege or my responsibility by putting things on the cloud, by sending them through the internet and by sending by email? And it is a real concern, because all of the e-filing system of the state of California was ransomware attacked, and all of the files that were supposed to be blocked, all of the juvenile records that were supposed to be kept private, were all swept up and put on the dark web. So this is a real concern that I have, that this is not a secure system, and the only answer we've come up with in the United States is, we're going to let you be able to track your data for 3 years. Yeah, so it's a problem. I'm concerned about it from a cybersecurity issue.
Is there something new about AI that can't be addressed through the legal system in the usual world about forgery and doctoring evidence? Or is it just the problem that it's hard to identify forgery?
Look at you talking about my sabbatical plan. I argue that we don't have enough causes of action. I believe we need a law of the horse. This is an old law joke. Do you need law of the horse? Some argue you don't need law of the horse, right? We have contracts, we have property, we got civil, we got criminal, we got ways to address stuff with horse ownership. But I argue that this thing is so new that it can't be solved in the spaces that we have. We're already seeing that there's a reason that the legislatures had to craft very specific legislation related to election fraud by deepfakes. It wasn't covered by what is already on the books. There's a reason that they're having to come up with new laws for non-consensual synthetic intimate images, because it's not covered, and we have to read our statutes very carefully. So I argue, Lord willing, if the provost gives me sabbatical, that I believe we need a new cause of action to actually address these particular things.
Thank you for your presentation. So what are your thoughts about students that are now suing professors and universities because they were accused of using AI in their assignments? And I'm pretty sure you know that Turnitin has one tool that will give us professors a percentage of AI used, and now we have students suing universities and professors.
This is why I'm going to say gainfully employed for decades. I mean, y'all just keep giving me new fact patterns for exams. But you're absolutely right? Do students have a cause of action? Do they have a right to say that they were defamed, right? That, let me be careful because I did give a talk for Turnitin earlier last year. So I'll say what I can say. These companies are going to have to be very, very intentional about describing if what they did or the way they wrote the algorithms was reasonable. Would a reasonable AI company have done the same thing? Which is why we need a new cause of action, because there's ways that one can argue, well, there's no custom right now. There's no custom to make sure that the product we put on the shelf is not going to cause a harm, or no reasonable company could have ever thought there'd be that many errors in a product we put on the shelf. Something you all should be aware of is anybody aware of IVF, in vitro fertilization, and this process that one goes through? Well, they scan a lot of the fertilized embryos for diseases, and it turns out that some of the diseases they've been scanning for, they've been wrong 85% of the time. 85% of the time, 93% in some cases. So they were telling people that there was inability of life for 93% of the time. They were dead wrong. Do they have a cause of action to say that those embryos should not have been destroyed and that they actually were viable? So we're going to watch a lot of things as they're advancing in the world of STEM and well, in all of our spaces, but in health sciences and the law, we don't have a definition of what is appropriate. I like your language, standard of care. What would a reasonable AI company have put on the market? What do we know best of what we have? I think, is that it, or we got time?
Let's take one last question, then we'll go to our
Who
break.
loves the law? Who's hyped to go to law school? Come join me over there, huh? Yeah, Alina.
Kind of along with what you're talking about, how much of an obstacle has the old constructs of law been to courts dealing with this issue? Because I think that generally the whole First Amendment issue has been abdicated, and it's just assumed that people have a First Amendment right in manipulating somebody else's image. And it seems like there's an argument to be made that that's not within the province of the First Amendment, that you're taking away somebody else's autonomy and First Amendment right to express themselves rather than somebody else.
But how are you expressing? So I think you're absolutely right, Ms. Lauer. I think some of you may have watched this case, the Google versus Gonzalez case. This is the Section 230 case where parents argued that because there were images of death, a particular type of death on YouTube, that it led to their daughter's death at a bombing in France. And they argued that it was a violation. Something was said on the Supreme Court that bothers me still. Justice Elena Kagan said, you know, we're not like the 9 greatest experts of the internet here. And everyone laughed, and I was so fundamentally bothered because they're making decisions about a thing they don't understand. All of our judges are making legal decisions on people's rights, access to liberty and justice off of something that they literally think that this is AI pixie, AI dust being spread over it, and magic has happened, and therefore you can't make any decisions. So they don't understand where the barriers form. They want AI to fit this brick and mortar world that isn't real. In the way the AI works. You explain encoders and decoders, and they're like, I don't see it, so how does it fit? And it doesn't. So I think we're gonna have a real problem, and this is why continued education that so many of you need to do, to be part of our legal community, to be a resource for continuing legal education, to help us stay abreast of these issues.
Excellent. Let's give a big round of applause.